All right, what's up, guys? Rick from DFSOnDemand.com. Gonna mix it up this week and do a video as opposed to a write-up. So it's week 12, so I figured I'd try something new to keep it interesting. I'm just gonna go through the DraftKings lobby and find some players that are interesting in one way or another, and we'll talk about them. So I hope you enjoy. All right, so here we are in the DraftKings lobby. We'll just go position by position here, and I'll kind of point out a couple of guys that I think are worth talking about. So let's start with quarterbacks. It's fairly straightforward this week. You know, we know that we've got some good matchups with Cam Newton and Russell Wilson, but I think a GPP play or a guy that might be overlooked is going to be Aaron Rodgers. First of all, he's just been outstanding. You can see how many points he's put up over the course of the last 5 weeks. The Packers defense is horrendous, meaning that the Packers are having, the offense is having to score a ton of points to stay in games. This game has a 47-point total with Philadelphia, but I think that matchup with Philadelphia is gonna keep a lot of people away, and I'm not sure that it should. So here is a points allowed by position chart. And for most of these tools here, these are things that I create myself. They're on DFSOnDemand.com. It's part of the subscription service if you want to see this stuff. But anyway, here's Philadelphia against quarterbacks, and this is broken down by week. So you can see they were really, really stingy to start the season through the first 4 weeks. They also had a really good game in week 8 against opposing quarterbacks. But 3 out of the last 4 weeks, their opposing quarterback has basically had a top 5 game. So they haven't really been that good recently, and now they're facing probably the best fantasy quarterback who's going to need to score the most points. So I'm wondering how many people are going to want to roster Aaron Rodgers with this bad matchup when they can go down and spend less money for a guy with a better matchup. So I think Aaron Rodgers will probably be under-owned in GPPs this week. I can make a case for Phillip Rivers basically in all formats. I don't think he'll be very highly owned across the board, so I think you can roll him out in GPPs. But I'm even willing to consider him in cash games. So if we look a little deeper here, you can see, you know what you're going to get from Phillip Rivers for the most part. He's going to throw 40 plus times. He's going to score his fantasy points. He's actually fairly consistent against his peers. So if we go to, again, here is another tool that I create. Phillip Rivers is right here. What I've sorted by is position and standard deviation. So if you're not familiar with this tool, basically it has all of Phillip Rivers' games here, and then the standard deviation, of course, would be how spread out those outputs are. So the higher the standard deviation, the more volatile the player is. The lower the standard deviation, the more consistent the player is. So Phillip Rivers, compared to his peers, is fairly consistent, about as consistent as Carson Wentz, but Phillip Rivers scores, 4 points, 4 DraftKings points more per week. Dak Prescott, very consistent and scores more, but he's on the Thursday slate if you're going to be playing that. So a combination of how many fantasy points he scores, which is nearly 17 per game, and how consistent he is, I think he's worth a look in cash games. So I think that's a fair point, but also in terms of GPPs, this is not an ideal matchup with Houston on paper, but you have to remember that this is a Houston team that right here in the last 2 weeks has allowed 19 and 22 fantasy points, which is 2 of their 3 worst performances against them, or I should say best performances for the quarterback. So the Houston defense trending in the wrong direction. Also, remember, they played Monday night in Mexico City. Now going home, I know that's not a terribly long flight back to Houston, but Phillip Rivers and the Chargers had a long week. They had a bye last week, so I expect them to be well prepared for this game. So Phillip Rivers, kind of a sneaky option that I'm looking at across all formats. All right, and then if you're looking for some more value, I mean, you really do have to consider Colin Kaepernick. I mean, I think he's very risky. I don't particularly trust the guy, but it's hard to overlook what he's doing right now. If we go back to this tool, which now I've sorted by the last 4 weeks. So here we go, the last 4 weeks of the season. Colin Kaepernick has scored the seventh most DraftKings points over the course of the last 4 weeks, across all players, across all positions. I mean, you see, it's more than basically everybody. I mean, Zeke Elliott, Tom Brady, Kirk Cousins. I mean, these guys are major fantasy performers, and Kirk Cousins is seventh on this list over the course of the last 4 weeks. So, really hard to overlook what he's doing right now. This Miami defense is something that we can take a little bit of a closer look here. Sorry for constantly moving the screen around for you, just trying to get you a better view. So here's Miami, very, very volatile. You can see from week to week, they can be a top defense or they can be one of the worst defenses in the league against opposing quarterbacks. So I think that there is some expectation that Kaepernick could put up a very good game. All right, so a couple of chalk options real quick here at the running back position. I don't need to tell you how awesome David Johnson is. Having an outstanding season, has an excellent matchup, has a ton of catches. The guy does it all. Yeah, he's going to be heavily owned and for good reason. Jay Ajayi, I think, is someone who is even more interesting because I think he has the excellent matchup, but he's kind of put up two duds in a row. So I'm really interested to see what his ownership is going to be. A lot of the casual fans will or casual players will come in here and be like, oh, he's only put up 20 combined DraftKings points in the last 2 weeks. Maybe I'll go for Melvin Gordon, or maybe I'll just spend up for David Johnson. I don't know what the thought process is going to be, but I do have to point out, and this is just a snippet of the projections that I do each week. And here's Ajayi. So you can see he's actually very highly projected for me. He's my top value running back in terms of salary. And the reason for that is because San Francisco is giving up 47% more DraftKings points to opposing running backs than the league average. Obviously a massive number. So he gets a huge boost in matchup here. And then also Las Vegas has the Dolphins projected at 27 points for this week, which is nearly a full touchdown more than they are usually projected for. So again, just a really good matchup with San Francisco. Vegas is kind of all in on Miami. So I still think that Ajayi is going to be heavily owned, but I'm sure there are going to be some people who will look at his last 2 weeks and avoid him, and I'm not certain that's a logical response. In this middle price range here, I'm a really big Rolls supporter, especially now that he's going to be the guy. In Seattle, he should be getting all the goal line work. He should be getting the early down work. Really, really like him. But outside of that, I think Latavius Murray is interesting. Not a great matchup with Carolina, but for 5,500, I don't know if people realize how good he's been. So if we flip back to one of my tools here and do this one. So this is now running backs over the course of the last 4 weeks. And who else but Latavius Murray with 22.3 DraftKings points over the course of the last 4 weeks. That is the third most in the league. And if you go back to week 7, he's actually averaging 20.3 points. So that's his last 4 games as opposed to his last 4 weeks. So either way, still really good. He's a guy who is, he's going to get all the goal line work. He's able to catch passes. So if we go back to his game logs, you'll see, he gets targeted at a pretty healthy rate. He can make a few catches. So he's going to help you on the sites that are full PPR as opposed to half point PPR. But I think he's a really good option, especially in GPPs, because his ownership is going to be driven down by two things. Number one, this questionable designation, which he's almost certainly going to suit up and play. And then the fact that he has, a poor matchup with Carolina that will certainly drive people away. So I think he'll come at a very low ownership if you're willing to invest. All right, let's go to wide receiver here. I'll try to speed up a little bit so this isn't like an hour-long video. A lot of good things to like here at wide receiver. Odell Beckham against the Browns is as chalky as it gets. Amari Cooper, great spot. I think that you can pivot from the chalk up here to the chalk down here, and look towards Larry Fitz, who is just an absolute target monster on this Arizona Cardinals team. You can see 6 catches on 7 targets last week was, not a good week for Larry Fitzgerald, and that's against a tough Minnesota defense that has caused havoc for a lot of wide receivers this year. But outside of that, look at all these targets he's getting. This guy gets a ton of looks from Carson Palmer. The Atlanta defense, not good. They're going to allow a lot of points. This game has, let me see, a 51-point total last time I checked. Yeah, 51 points from Vegas, which is the highest on this slate. Expect some fireworks. Arizona is actually a 3-point underdog, so by the looks of what Las Vegas is putting out in terms of game script or potential game flow, Larry Fitzgerald could be heavily involved. Okay, down in this middle tier of pricing, and as I scroll down, trying to see if there's anybody who jumps off the screen. Not particularly, but in the middle tier pricing here, you may have noticed Mike Wallace has been really good, and that's because he's been awesome. But even I did not realize how good he has been. So if we go back to this tool that I have here, which I call the player scoring calendar for obvious reasons, it's kind of like a calendar. Here are over the course of the last 4 weeks, the best wide receivers in the league. And these names make sense. It's Mike Evans, Odell Beckham, AJ Green, Julio Jones, and Mike Wallace. Averaging 21.3 DraftKings points over the last 4 weeks. So he's been the 5th best receiver recently, yet he's priced, and I counted this, as wide receiver number 28 this week. So some potential value there. Not a great matchup with Cincinnati, but certainly not the worst thing that you could do. I certainly trust Joe Flacco to get Mike Wallace the ball more so at home than on the road. But that tool also points out a couple of other interesting options here. So Golden Tate and Jamison Crowder are numbers 6 and 7 on this list, which are guys that you might have just overlooked. So if you're watching this before the Thursday slate, I think both those guys play on Thursday. On Thanksgiving, yeah, they're the first 2 games. So that's also worth noting for weeks moving forward. But yeah, that's a really interesting thing how good Mike Wallace has actually been. And then real quick, with the injury to AJ Green, someone presumably a Cincinnati wide receiver is going to have to step up. Tyler Boyd seems to be the reasonable option. 6 catches on 8 targets last week. I'm not nearly as optimistic on this kid as maybe the rest of the industry is, just because I'd almost like to take a wait and see approach. I don't think it's a linear transfer of value, like the next wide receiver steps up and that guy turns into AJ Green, especially at the wide receiver position. I think this might actually benefit guys like Tyler Eifert more, who just has more targets to go around. Eifert's at least proven that he can explode and have massive games in the NFL. I don't think it's just like whoever the backup wide receiver is going to step in and be AJ Green. So it should be interesting to see in Cincinnati. Not a great matchup with Baltimore. Low Vegas total. Probably staying away from the situation altogether and reevaluating it again next week. Okay, the tight ends position, really difficult. A lot of garbage out there, especially with reports that doesn't look like Gronk's going to suit up. Jimmy Graham has been the guy that over the last 4 weeks is putting up a ton of points. So here's Jimmy Graham. Over the course of the last 4, he is the 3rd best tight end. Now, with Jordan Reed playing on Thursday and Gronk unlikely to suit up, that would make Jimmy Graham the best tight end on the slate over the course of the last 4 weeks. So keep an eye out for him. Other than that, I think there is some interesting guys. Gary Barnidge. Now that Josh McCown is going to be back as the Browns starting quarterback, remember these guys had a magical 2015 season. They seem to have a clear connection and chemistry. A really good price on Barnidge, who had a great season last year, and now gets his guy back. So I think that he's interesting. Also a great matchup. And then there's Lance Kendricks, who I think is, here he is, 3,000. Lance Kendricks, this is, a potentially high scoring matchup with the Saints. I don't love that Jared Goff is now the quarterback, but he did get 7 targets last week, and Kendricks has been solid. You can see outside of this dud he put up, 4 out of his last 5 weeks have at least been decent by tight end standards on DraftKings, which are very, very low. But I don't think that you should completely overlook Kendricks this week. All right, and we'll wrap up here with defenses, which I don't even normally like to talk about since a lot of times you just end up playing for touchdowns or interception returns and kickoff returns for a touchdown more than anything, which are very, very difficult to predict. But I will defer to my one of my charts here and look at some teams that allow their opponents to score a lot of points in terms of defense. So any defense against the Jets, averaging 12 points per game this season. These are the common suspects here, right? Arizona, you'd expect because Carson Palmer has thrown so many interceptions. Cleveland, you'd expect to be on this list. Jacksonville, all that good stuff. So for the purposes of this week, that would translate into the Bills, who are chalky, the Giants, who are chalky. Let's see here, the Patriots, who are chalky, but at least you get a little bit of a discount. Those teams are all there. But I do want to point out one, really under the radar contrarian type defense, and that's going to be the St. Louis Rams, who the St. Louis Rams are the sixth least expensive defense. Actually, I guess they'd be the third. $2,400. Really, really cheap. They're a team that averages nearly 8 points per game. They're a pretty solid defense. They don't give up a lot of points. The problem here is they're facing Drew Brees, right? They're facing Drew Brees at home, who is just going to shred them and put up a ton of points. Certainly possible, but I don't think that's necessarily a given. So here's the Saints. 4 out of the last 5 weeks, the defense against the Saints has scored double-digit points. You can see 12, 10, 13, and 10. Of course, there is some risk here where they just absolutely shred the Rams. But I mean, at $2,400, wouldn't you be thrilled with any of these double-digit points? Drew Brees is not. He throws a lot of interceptions. He's going to score a lot of points, and he's gonna rack up the yards and the touchdowns. But he's not immune to interceptions like some quarterbacks in the league are. So I don't think they're the worst play. I think you could get away with playing the Rams, especially if that price point unlocks another guy, maybe a big time wide receiver or a big time running back for you. All right, so there you go. That was a little longer than I was hoping it was going to be, but lots of stuff to talk about. Trying to mix it up this week. If you like the video format, shoot a comment below. Give it a thumbs up. Just let me know. But I might go back to doing an article again next week. So I hope you guys win a lot of money this week. Good luck. Talk to you soon.